Well, good morning. I myself and fellow by the name of Dave, who's a regular on our Thursday night meditation sittings here. He and I were the only ones here Thursday, and so afterwards we sat around and talked for an hour or so, and kind of commiserating about. He's an older fellow like I am, and kind of commiserating about the state of institutional religion as it is now. And what brought that up was the fact that there seems to be so much anger and violence in our society nowadays, and ready access to guns, and people just willing to kill anybody for the hell of it, and because they're hurting inside, and so they've got to hurt someone else. And it's such a sad state of affairs. And when we were young, back in the 50s, even the early 60s, religion, even if you didn't necessarily believe in all of it, a lot more people were involved in institutional religion. They went to church, or they were dragged to church, maybe more appropriately, by their parents. And stores weren't open on Sunday. Many of you probably can't believe that, but there was no shopping on Sundays because the stores were closed. It was the Sabbath day, and you kept it holy. You stayed home. You visited family. You had a big meal. You had friends over or family over. And we've lost that sense of family and cohesiveness and friendliness. Now it's everyone for themselves, and I'm going to get what's due me, or what I think is due me. Come hell or high water, don't be in my way. It's a sad state of affairs. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the television show Cops, and their theme song, which was done by Inner Circle, a reggae group. Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? It's a catchy tune, really catchy, and I love it. And some of you are old enough to remember the Detroit Pistons, the bad boys of the late 80s. We had John Sally and Bill Laimbeer and who else? Dumars, and who else was on that group? I can't, huh? Yeah, yeah. And they were known for being very rough, physical, defensive players. And some people credited them for that, and others gave them a bad rap. They played dirty, the bad boys of Detroit, because they kind of changed the nature of basketball. Well, religion is not without its bad boys too. And there are a couple of them that I want to talk about today. One of them you've heard of before, many times in your different clergy talking about them. Maybe you've read about them too. Is Ahimsaka, or more well known by his later name that he was tagged with, is Angulimala, which means finger mala. A mala. We've got malas on your wrists or malas on your neck. Some of you have them on your neck. And rather than having beads to count for your practice, he used to have knuckle joints on his from fingers that he cut off of his victims. Born into a Brahmin family, born into an intelligent family, he went to school, he went to college. He was one of the best students there was at a college that was up in what is now, what's right above India, Pakistan. And he was so good that his fellow classmates became jealous of him. And so they devised this scheme, this story. Does that sound familiar? Fake news? So they devised this fake news about him. They told his instructor about it. His instructor believed it and said, here's what you need to do to make amends. And he said, I want 1,000 knuckles brought to me, and I'll reinstitute you as a a student here. So Angulimala becomes this notorious robber and murderer. He's head of a gang of thieves, gang of pillagers, a gang of killers. And the story goes that one day, the Buddha decides to go down this path into this woods area that none of the villagers would go any longer. The Buddha decided to go down there to see what would happen. And the story goes that Angulimala started chasing him. And the Buddha was just walking normally, and Angulimala was running and running. And yet he couldn't catch up with the Buddha. Of course, what's the imagery behind that? You know, when our life isn't going right, when we're not behaving appropriately, when we're not monitoring ourselves in terms of morality, ethics, the precepts, you know, we're all in a tizzy. We're all going around crazy. We're getting nowhere, actually, in our lives. Even though we may think we're enjoying it, we're getting nowhere. Whereas it's the quiet person, it's the still person, it's the meditative person who is really making progress in their life. That's the imagery of that story. So Angulimala is taken into the Sangha. Now, more than likely, Angulimala didn't have this sudden religious conversion that the suttas would tend to lend credence to. Probably what happened is he wanted to escape the law. And at that time, the only way to escape the law and societal justice was to join a religious commune. You were safe in a religious commune. What better way? Here's the Buddha. Hey, can I become part of your group? You know, so I don't get killed by the law. He becomes part of the group. But truly over time, he becomes a favorite disciple. And even the local populace says, wow, the fellow who used to be a himsaka, who's now Angulimala. Look at how he works with the people. He even became the patron saint of childbirth. He helped a couple of women in their childbirthing process to keep them calm so that they had very pleasant, normal births. And in Southeast Asia and South Asia, he's considered to be the patron saint of people who can't have children and of childbirth. Now, his karma, his actions caught up with him. You can't escape that. You can't escape what it is that you do in your life. And eventually he was stoned to death by the local populace. They couldn't take it anymore to see him free, knowing that he had killed some of their relatives and friends and whatnot. His karma caught up with him. There's another bad boy that most of you probably hadn't heard of. I actually hadn't heard of him until this week, until I was doing some exploring about who was available in Christianity that could be classified a bad boy. He's called St. Moses the Black, or St. Moses the Ethiopian. He lived in the 300s, about 700 years after Angulimala. He lived in Egypt, born in Ethiopia. The populace down in Ethiopia has much darker skin, which is why he's called Moses the Black. He had actually been a slave of a government official up in Alexandria, right on the Mediterranean, the top part of Egypt. And the story goes that because of his thieving and possibly he murdered someone, his master said, get out of here, I don't want you around me anymore. And so he went down into the Nile Valley and got a group of like-minded individuals around him, like Angulimala, men who started to pillage and steal and kill and live that life outside of the law. Now, the one thing about Moses the Black, think about the movie The Green Mile and John Coffey, the prisoner. You got that imagery? Michael Clark Duncan, Michael Clark Duncan. He's 6'5", 320 pounds, or was. It's said in literature that was written about 50 years after Moses the Black died that he was a huge man. extremely black skin, fearsome looking, intimidating to the populace. And yet also in that same manner, people were attracted to him because of his physical characteristics. It sounds like he was a good-looking man. And he was a ladies' man. And he was a drinker. And he enjoyed fine food. And one night, as he was trying to break into this house, the owner woke up, and it said that Moses took off running, and he came upon a small little monastery that was there in the desert. And they gave him refuge. He didn't tell them what he'd been doing. They just gave him refuge. And over the few days that he was there, he said, wow, look at this. This is just absolutely amazing. Nothing bothers these men. These monks aren't fazed by anything. They just accept anything that comes at them. They don't have any problems with it. They don't have any grudges. They don't seem to have any passions, any desires for sex or fine food or drink. They're satisfied with just the minimum. I like that. I like that. And so he starts studying with them. He becomes part of their small little group. And they realize the attractiveness of this man and how he can bring people to him. And people start hearing about this tall, strong, intimidating black man who was a crook, a thief, a murderer. And yet now, look at what he is, what he's become. And they started taking in new monks, new followers. Eventually, Moses the Black became extremely revered, became a dedicated monk. In fact, so dedicated, he's considered a saint now within Orthodoxy, Catholicism, Anglicanism, and Lutheranism. He's one of the original desert fathers, desert monks, in other words. And he had 80 men. He was eventually ordained a priest. And he had 80 monks who were underneath him. However, he too knew that he had to die the way he had lived originally. And a bunch of thieves and murderers who knew who he was and did not like the fact that he had become what he'd become descended upon their small little village of hermitages there, their monks. And he said, you guys escape, go hide. But 6 monks stayed with him. And they were all killed by the sword. And Moses the Black had said, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. I now pay for my sins. Karma catches up with you. You got a root of the karma you got to pay for. So, what's the lesson in all of this? Like I said earlier, there's so much anger and violence. Every morning when I drive to the veterinary clinic, when I'm healthy, I listen to the news, and there's been another freeway shooting that night. There's been a shooting on the east side or on the west side. A couple of kids were killed. They got hold of guns, or a few more people were killed. And it's getting so now that so there's a few more dead. So there's a few more. And it seems to be getting out of control. What do we need? So I think there's lessons to be learned. We got to learn to sit quietly, to stop all of the chaos in our lives, all of the busyness in our lives, all of the stuff that we do we think that's important, chasing after money, after sex, after power, after material goods, you name it, chasing after educations, chasing, as if this is going to give us some happiness, some pleasure. And we find nothing. Nothing. It's only when you start to sit still. The abbot, before Moses the Black had his own monastery, the abbot said to him one day, he said, go sit in your cell. I'm not talking about a prison cell. Go sit in your room. Your room will give you everything that you need to know. Just go sit quietly. Let those thoughts settle. Learn to relax with everything that is. Learn to accept everything that is, to look at it truthfully, honestly. Now, it's also said that Moses had a lot of trouble for a number of years. He would escape out into the desert, go into the towns so that he could drink, so that he could have sex, so that he could eat good food. The passions just kept driving at him, driving him crazy. So one day, Isidore, again, the abbot, said, get up early in the morning. I want to take you out. We're going to watch the sunrise. They go out there and the sun's coming up. And he said, you see, Moses, do you see how slowly it takes for the sun's rays to chase away the dark? So it is for your soul to chase away the dark. We can't do it all at once. We want to be good immediately. We want to get rid of our sins immediately. We can't do it. We just keep working at it. That's why we call it practice. Keep practicing, practicing. You get better, you get better, you get better. Probably the psalmist in chapter 46 of the Psalms of the Hebrew Bible said it best. Be still and know that I am God. And as Buddhists, we can say, be still and know. Just be still and know. All that is, everything that is. Be quiet. Be still. I want to close today with an aspiration. We read this every Thursday night as we finish our meditation. And I think it's just something each of us can kind of take home mentally and reflect on and help us with our practice. It goes like this. If I have strayed from the path, may I find my way back again. If I have carelessly hurt someone today, by word or deed, may I be more mindful the next time. May my actions reflect loving kindness and compassion. May I strive to cleanse my heart from hate and envy and live in harmony with all beings. May I be close to the Dharma in good as well as in difficult times. And when the moment comes for me to leave this world, may I do so without fear or regret. Whatever wrong someone may do to me, may I be compassionate, forgiving, holding no hatred in my heart. May I be grateful for acts of love and consideration shown me. May this life be a blessing and a source of happiness for all beings. Namo Buddhaya.